At 21, Clara Whitmore learned how quickly a family could erase one of its own. The argument began at dinner. Her father sat at the head of the table, speaking as though Clara's future had already been decided. She would marry Daniel Mercer, the son of his business partner. The marriage would strengthen the family's connections, protect their reputation, and, according to him, give Clara the secure life she was too young to choose for herself. Clara looked around the polished dining room. Her mother avoided her eyes. Her older brother kept eating, pretending not to hear. "I'm not marrying him," Clara said. Her father slowly placed his fork on the table. The sound was quiet, but the entire room seemed to freeze. "You will do what this family expects." "I've done that my whole life." Clara's voice trembled, yet she did not look away. She had abandoned her studies to help at the family office. She had attended every dinner, smiled for every photograph, and stayed silent whenever her opinions embarrassed them. But marrying a man she barely knew was the one sacrifice she could not make. Her father stood. "Then you are no longer part of this family." Her mother whispered his name, but he raised a hand to silence her. Clara was given 20 minutes to pack. She left the house with one suitcase, $87 in her wallet, and a coat too thin for the November cold. No one followed her outside. No one asked her to return. For the next 3 weeks, she slept on a friend's couch and worked temporary shifts at a roadside cafe. Every morning, she checked her phone, hoping for a message from her mother. Nothing came. Then, during the final hour of a rainy Tuesday shift, a gray-haired attorney entered the cafe and asked for her by name. He introduced himself as Mr. Holloway and placed a weathered envelope on the counter. "I represent the estate of Evelyn Whitmore," he said. Clara stared at him. Evelyn had been her great-grandmother, a woman the family rarely mentioned. She had lived alone in an old orchard outside Bellwether County and had died nearly 6 years earlier. "There must be some mistake," Clara said. Mr. Holloway shook his head. "The property was held in trust until you turned 21. Inside the envelope was a deed, a rusted brass key, and a handwritten note containing only one sentence. For the one they cast aside, I leave what they were too blind to value." Clara had inherited 83 acres of neglected land, a collapsing farmhouse, and an orchard filled with hundreds of dead trees. It was the first thing anyone had ever given her without asking her to become someone else. 2 days later, Clara stood at the entrance of the property with the rusted brass key in her hand. The gate leaned sideways between 2 stone pillars, nearly swallowed by vines. Beyond it, a narrow dirt road disappeared beneath weeds and fallen branches. At the far end stood the farmhouse, its roof sagging under years of rain and neglect. But it was the orchard that held Clara's attention. Rows of gray, twisted trees stretched across the land like the remains of a forgotten army. Their branches were bare. Their bark had split open. Some trunks had collapsed completely, while others stood hollow and blackened by age. Nothing moved except the wind. Mr. Holloway waited beside his car while Clara walked through the gate. "There are 3 years of unpaid property taxes," he said. "The county has not begun foreclosure proceedings yet, but you do not have much time." "How much do I owe?" When he told her, Clara felt her stomach tighten. It was more money than she had ever possessed. "The land could be sold," he added gently. "A development company has already expressed interest." Clara looked toward the dead trees. "Why would anyone want this place?" "The road nearby may be expanded. They believe the property could be cleared for warehouses." Cleared. The word followed her as she walked deeper into the orchard. By noon, news of her arrival had already reached the town. At the general store, 2 men openly discussed the property, while Clara stood only a few feet away. "Old Evelyn refused every offer," one of them said. "Stubborn woman died protecting a graveyard of trees." The other laughed. "And now the girl inherits the bill." That evening, Clara's brother called for the first time since she had been thrown out. She answered before she could stop herself. "I heard about the orchard," he said. "Father thinks you should sell it immediately. Father threw me out. He is still trying to protect you from making another mistake." Clara looked through the cracked farmhouse window at the dark rows of trees. Did he know about the inheritance? There was a pause. Everyone knew Evelyn had left something in trust. No one expected it to be worth much. No one expected it to be worth much. Clara ended the call. Outside, the last light faded over the orchard. The trees looked lifeless, but their arrangement was too precise to feel random. Each row had been planted with care. Small metal tags still hung from several branches, though rust had erased most of the writing. Near the center of the property, Clara noticed one tree larger than all the others. Its trunk was split, but someone had wrapped an old iron chain around it. Hanging from the chain was a weathered wooden sign. Clara brushed away the moss and read the words carved into its surface. "Do not cut the dead until they give up their secret." For the first time, the ruined orchard did not look empty. It looked guarded. Clara spent her first night in the farmhouse wrapped in 2 blankets beside a weak fire. The electricity worked in only half the rooms. Rainwater tapped steadily through a crack in the ceiling, and every gust of wind made the old walls groan. Yet the house did not feel abandoned. It felt paused, as though Evelyn had stepped outside years ago and never returned. The next morning, Clara began searching. She found jars of dried herbs in the kitchen, gardening tools arranged carefully near the back door, and faded photographs covering one wall of the sitting room. Most showed the orchard in better years, children beneath flowering branches, wooden crates filled with apples, and Evelyn standing beside a harvest wagon. In every photograph, Evelyn wore the same silver locket. Clara remembered seeing it once as a child. Her great-grandmother had caught her staring and whispered, "Some things are safer when people think they are worthless." At the time, Clara had assumed she meant the old necklace. Now she was not so sure. Upstairs, the bedroom had been left untouched. A wool coat still hung behind the door. Reading glasses rested beside a closed book. Beneath the bed, Clara discovered a narrow wooden box secured with a small brass lock. The rusted key from the envelope did not fit the front door. It fit the box. Inside lay a stack of letters, a hand-drawn map of the orchard, and a thick journal bound in cracked green leather. Most of the early pages described ordinary farm work, late frosts, damaged fences, insect outbreaks, and poor harvests. But as Clara read further, the entries changed. Evelyn began writing about men who repeatedly offered to buy the land. She never used their full names, only initials. She mentioned missing records, altered property surveys, and someone searching the orchard while she was away. One entry had been underlined 3 times. They believe the trees are dead because they only look above the soil. Clara turned the page. A rough drawing showed the orchard divided into 12 sections. Several trees were marked with circles. The largest tree, the one wrapped in iron chain, was marked with a black star. Beneath the map, Evelyn had written, "The trunks are only guardians. The inheritance is alive beneath them." A floorboard creaked behind Clara. She turned sharply. No one was there. Then she noticed muddy footprints crossing the hallway. They were not hers. Someone else had entered the farmhouse, and whoever it was had been looking for the journal. Clara closed the journal and slipped it beneath her coat. The muddy footprints led downstairs, crossed the kitchen, and ended at the back door. Nothing appeared to be missing, but several drawers had been pulled open. Whoever had entered the farmhouse had known exactly what to search for. Clara locked every door before returning to the orchard. Using Evelyn's map, she found the first tree marked with a circle. It stood in the eastern row, its trunk split from top to bottom. At first, Clara saw nothing unusual. Then sunlight caught a thin line of metal beneath the loose bark. She pulled the wood aside. A small copper plate had been nailed inside the hollow trunk. On it were 3 symbols, a triangle, the number 7, and a branch bearing 5 leaves. The next marked tree contained a similar plate, but with a different number. By afternoon, Clara had examined 6 trunks. Each one had been deliberately hollowed, carefully resealed with fitted pieces of bark, and marked with symbols matching Evelyn's map. Inside the 7th tree, she found something more. A narrow metal cylinder had been pushed deep into the hollow. Clara pulled it free and twisted open the cap. Inside were several short pieces of dormant apple wood wrapped in waxed cloth. Each cutting had been sealed at both ends and labeled in Evelyn's handwriting. Whitmore Red, Mother Tree, Eastern Block, 1948. Clara stared at the dry-looking branches. They did not resemble treasure, but Evelyn had protected them more carefully than jewelry. That evening, Clara carried the cylinder to Samuel Reed, an elderly orchardist who owned a small nursery outside town. The moment he unwrapped one of the cuttings, his expression changed. "Where did you find this?" "Inside one of my great-grandmother's trees." Samuel examined the wood beneath a magnifying lens. "These are scions," he said. "They were meant for grafting." Clara frowned. "So they can grow into new trees?" "Not by themselves. But if living tissue remains, a scion can be joined to a healthy rootstock and produce the same fruit as the original tree." He pointed to the label. "Seeds would not preserve Whitmore Red exactly. Apple seedlings vary, but grafted wood can carry a variety forward for generations." "Then why has no one heard of it?" Samuel lowered his voice. Whitmore Red was once known for surviving late frost, dry summers, and diseases that damaged other orchards in this county. Growers replaced it with faster, more uniform commercial apples. By the time they regretted it, Evelyn's orchard was believed to be dead. Clara unfolded the map. Samuel traced the marked rows with one finger. "These numbers may identify the rootstocks," he said, "and if the roots beneath those dead trunks are still alive, the trees might not be gone." Samuel looked at her. "The upper wood may be dead, but the foundation could still be waiting." The next morning, Clara returned to the largest chain tree. At its base, beneath weeds and fallen bark, a pale green shoot was pushing through the soil. The orchard had given her its first answer. Samuel returned to the orchard carrying a grafting knife, a magnifying lens, and a roll of colored cloth. Before examining the trees, he gave Clara a warning. "Living roots alone are not enough," he said. "If the shoots come from below the old graft union, they belong to the rootstock, not Whitmore Red." Clara looked at the pale green growth beside the chained tree. "Then how do we know what survived?" "We find where Evelyn joined the two trees. They cleared the soil and moss from the base of the trunk until Samuel uncovered a swollen ridge beneath the dead bark. It was the old graft union. The green shoot had emerged just above it. Samuel carefully scraped a narrow section of bark. A thin layer of living green tissue appeared underneath. "This is not merely the rootstock," he said. "Part of the original fruiting wood is still alive." Using Evelyn's map, they inspected every marked tree. Clara removed weeds while Samuel searched for graft lines, surviving buds, and living cambium beneath the lower bark. Of the 48 marked trees, 11 still contained traces of living tissue above their graft unions. The trunks looked dead, but the Whitmore Red variety had not completely disappeared. Samuel also examined the preserved scions from the metal cylinder. Most had dried beyond the point of grafting, but the labels, growth rings, and remaining tissue could still help confirm the variety's identity. "They may not all grow," he explained, "but they tell us what Evelyn was protecting and where to look." Later, Samuel took Clara to a locked room behind his nursery. Shelves were filled with handwritten records, faded photographs, and orchard catalogs collected over decades. He opened a booklet printed nearly 70 years earlier. On one page was an illustration of a deep red apple streaked with pale gold. Whitmore Red. The notes described a fruit with a rich, spiced flavor, long storage life, and an unusual ability to endure late frosts and dry summers. Yet commercial growers had gradually abandoned it because the apples varied in size and the trees produced more slowly than modern varieties. Growers wanted fruit that looked identical, Samuel said. Stores wanted apples that could survive long shipping. Whitmore Red had flavor and resilience, but it was less convenient. Clara stared at the illustration. "So they decided it had no value." "Not no value," Samuel replied. "The wrong kind of value for the system they built." The words stayed with her. Her family had treated her the same way. Samuel turned to the final record. It stated that the last confirmed Whitmore Red tree had been lost more than 20 years earlier. "If Evelyn's trees are genuine," he said, "this orchard may contain the last living material of the variety." The dead trunks were not hiding gold. They were guarding something rarer, a living line that the rest of the world had already declared extinct. Clara used nearly all the money she had left to save the 11 living root systems. She bought grafting knives, protective wax, young branches from related apple varieties, fencing, compost, and a second-hand irrigation pump that coughed black smoke whenever it started. Samuel warned her to work slowly, but the county tax deadline was approaching. Clara felt she had no time for patience. "If we can get enough grafts growing this season, I can prove the orchard has value," she said. Samuel shook his head. Trees do not care about deadlines. But Clara had already spent weeks being told the land was worthless. She wanted visible results before the development company returned with another offer. She began grafting before the weather had fully stabilized. For 3 days, she cut away dead wood, joined fresh scions to the living rootstocks, sealed the wounds, and wrapped each graft tightly. Tiny buds appeared soon afterward. Clara believed she had succeeded. Then the temperature dropped. A late frost covered the orchard overnight. By morning, the new buds had turned brown. Clara ran from tree to tree, removing the coverings and checking every graft. Several had split where she had tied them too tightly. Others had dried because the cuts had not aligned properly. Of the first 20 grafts, 17 failed. She stood among the damaged trees with her hands shaking. "This was all the living material we had," she said. "Not all of it," Samuel replied, "but too much of it." For the first time, anger entered his voice. "I told you not to rush. I was trying to save the orchard." "No, you were trying to prove everyone wrong before the trees were ready." The words struck harder than Clara expected. That afternoon, a black truck stopped at the gate. A representative from Vale Development stepped out carrying a folder. He looked over the failed grafts and gave Clara a sympathetic smile. "Restoring an orchard is expensive," he said, "especially one this far gone." He placed a written offer on the hood of his truck. It was enough to pay the taxes, repay her debts, and leave her with more money than she had ever owned. "You could walk away from this," he said. "No more broken house, no more dead trees." For a moment, Clara imagined signing. Then she noticed fresh tire marks near the eastern rows. Someone had driven through the property before the representative arrived. That evening, she checked the metal cylinder where the remaining Whitmore Red material had been stored. The lock had been forced. Several carefully preserved cuttings were gone. The frost had destroyed most of her first attempt. But someone else was making sure she would not get a second. Clara did not sleep that night. She searched the farmhouse, the nursery shed, and every marked tree, hoping the stolen cuttings had been misplaced. By dawn, only 3 preserved Whitmore Red scions remained. 3 chances. Samuel arrived shortly after sunrise. He examined the broken lock, then looked at Clara. "We cannot afford another mistake." This time she listened. They delayed the grafting until the weather stabilized. Samuel taught her how to read the rootstock before cutting, how to test the bark for living tissue, choose the strongest shoots, align the thin green layers beneath the bark, and protect each graft without strangling it. Clara stopped measuring progress by the calendar. She began measuring it by the trees. Evelyn's journal revealed another clue. Besides several numbered rootstocks, she had drawn small crescent symbols. Clara followed them to the western edge of the orchard, where thick blackberry bushes covered a low stone wall. Behind the wall stood 5 young trees hidden beneath years of tangled growth. They were small, bent, and nearly invisible, but alive. Samuel cut a narrow section from one branch and studied it. "Evelyn planted backups," he said. She knew the main orchard might be destroyed. The hidden trees carried more Whitmore Red material. Clara felt as though her great-grandmother had reached across time to give her one final chance. They worked slowly. Each cut was deliberate. Each graft was labeled and wrapped by hand. Clara built simple frost covers from old frames and cloth. She repaired the irrigation lines and spread compost around the roots without burying the graft unions. For weeks, nothing happened. Then, one morning, a green bud opened on the first graft. 2 days later, another appeared. By the end of the month, 7 grafts were growing. The orchard still looked dead from the road. Gray trunks remained standing across the fields, and the farmhouse still leaned beneath its damaged roof. But beneath that ruined surface, life was returning. Clara photographed every new leaf and recorded each change in Evelyn's journal. She sent samples to a heritage fruit laboratory for identification, though the results would take time. One evening, she stood beneath the chained tree and saw fresh growth curling around the dead trunk. The old wood had not returned to life. It had done something more important. It had protected the roots until someone patient enough came to understand them. For the first time since inheriting the orchard, Clara no longer felt she was trying to prove the land had value. She was watching it prove itself. 3 weeks after the first healthy grafts appeared, the representative from Vale Development returned. This time, he was not alone. A silver sedan stopped behind his truck, and a tall man in a dark coat stepped out. He introduced himself as Adrian Vale, the company's owner. He did not look at the farmhouse. He went straight to the orchard. "You have been busy," he said, studying the green shoots growing from the old roots. Clara stood between him and the chained tree. "You entered my property before." Adrian smiled slightly. "That is a serious accusation. So is stealing plant material." His expression did not change, but his eyes moved toward the eastern rows. Clara noticed. Samuel had warned her not to reveal how much they had recovered, so she had moved the remaining cuttings to a hidden cold storage box beneath the nursery floor. Adrian opened a leather folder. Inside was a new offer, nearly twice the amount proposed before. "You inherited land you cannot afford," he said. "The taxes are due soon. The house needs repairs. The orchard may take years to produce anything worth selling. Then why double the offer?" For the first time, Adrian paused. "The property has strategic value." "The road?" "Among other things." Clara held up a copy of Evelyn's old orchard record. "Did your family know about Whitmore Red?" The confidence disappeared from his face for only a second. It was enough. Samuel later helped Clara search county archives. They found that Adrian's grandfather had once operated a large commercial orchard nearby. Old correspondence showed he had tried repeatedly to buy Evelyn's land after disease and frost destroyed his own trees. One letter included a revealing sentence. "Her stock may be the only line that survived. Secure it before anyone understands what she has." Adrian Vale had not come for warehouses. He had come for the trees. That evening, Clara received an email from the Heritage Fruit Laboratory. The samples were a close genetic match to archived Whitmore Red material. The variety was real, and the orchard likely held the only surviving living source. Clara printed the report and placed it beside Vale's contract. The company had offered enough money to solve every immediate problem in her life. But the document in her other hand proved why they were willing to pay it. The next morning, Adrian returned expecting her signature. Clara tore the contract in half. "You were right about one thing," she said. "This land has strategic value." Then she closed the gate between them. The laboratory report changed everything. Until then, Clara had possessed only a handful of living grafts and a story no bank was willing to trust. Now she had proof that the orchard contained the last known living source of Whitmore Red. Samuel contacted a heritage fruit conservancy. Within days, botanists, orchard historians, and specialty growers began requesting samples. Clara refused to sell the original material outright. Instead, she created a propagation agreement. Every approved nursery could receive a limited number of grafts, but the mother trees would remain in the orchard. Each new tree would be registered, and part of every sale would fund the restoration of the land. The first orders came before the trees produced a single apple. Rare fruit collectors wanted young trees. Small cider makers wanted future harvest contracts. Chefs offered deposits for the first boxes of fruit. A university research program requested access to study the variety's resistance to local weather. The dead orchard had begun earning money while it still looked ruined. Clara used the first payments to settle the overdue taxes and repair the farmhouse roof. She installed security cameras, reinforced the nursery, and hired 2 local workers to help care for the grafts. By spring, rows of young Whitmore Red trees stood inside the restored nursery. The old trunks remained in place. Clara would not cut them down. They shielded the young growth from wind, supported protective covers, and reminded every visitor how close the variety had come to disappearing. A year later, the first revived tree produced 3 apples. They were uneven in size and streaked with gold, exactly as the old catalog had shown. Clara carried the first fruit to Samuel. He cut it carefully and handed her a slice. The flavor was sharp at first, then deepened into honey, spice, and something almost floral. Samuel smiled. That is why Evelyn protected it. At the first Heritage Harvest auction, a small crate sold for more than Clara had once earned in several months at the cafe. But the true fortune was larger than the fruit. She now owned a nursery, licensing rights, future harvest contracts, and the only orchard capable of supplying authentic Whitmore Red stock. The land Vale had called worthless was valued at several times his final offer. Clara stood beneath the chained tree as workers prepared the next row of grafts. The fortune had never been hidden inside the dead wood. It had been protected beneath it, waiting for someone who understood that value does not always look alive. 3 years after Clara first entered the ruined orchard, the Whitmore Red Harvest Festival drew hundreds of visitors to Bellwether County. The farmhouse had been restored, but not modernized beyond recognition. Evelyn's old photographs still hung in the sitting room. The chained tree remained at the center of the orchard, surrounded by young branches heavy with deep red fruit. Clara had turned the property into more than a business. It was now a conservation orchard, a nursery, and a training ground for young growers who wanted to preserve forgotten regional crops. Several workers she had hired were people who had once struggled to find stable employment. That morning, a black car stopped outside the gate. Clara's parents and brother stepped out. She had not seen them since the night she was disowned. Her father looked older. His posture was still rigid, but the confidence Clara remembered had faded. "We heard what you built," her mother said softly. Her brother glanced toward the crowded orchard. "Father believes the family could help you expand." Clara almost laughed. Years earlier they had told her the property was a burden. Now that it appeared in magazines and attracted investors, they called it an opportunity. Her father cleared his throat. "We made mistakes." Clara waited. "We thought you were throwing away your future," he continued. "Perhaps we judged too quickly." It was not an apology, but it was closer than anything he had ever offered. Clara looked at the people harvesting fruit between the rows. She thought of Samuel, Evelyn's journal, the failed grafts, and the night someone stole the last cuttings. "I do not need the family to control this," she said. Her father's face tightened. "I am not asking for revenge," Clara continued, "but I will not hand over what I built simply because it is valuable now." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Can we at least be part of your life again?" Clara looked toward the chained tree. Forgiveness, she realized, did not require surrender. "You can begin by staying for the festival," she said. "Nothing more is promised." Later that afternoon, Clara addressed the crowd beneath Evelyn's old sign. She spoke about forgotten trees, lost knowledge, and the danger of judging worth only by what appears productive. Then she read the sentence Evelyn had left for her. "For the one they cast aside, I leave what they were too blind to value." The audience believed she was talking about the orchard. Clara knew Evelyn had meant both of them. The trees had survived beneath dead wood, and Clara had survived beneath every judgment placed upon her. Neither had needed permission to become valuable.